Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are tackling something pretty massive. We're mapping out this prophetic end times timeline.
That's right. It's known in our source material as the last week, or Anya.
Yeah, and it's dense. You've got intense theological debate, some frankly terrifying imagery, and really specific timing mechanisms involved.
It's a lot to unpack. We've pulled together a pretty deep synthesis here, drawing heavily from, the foundational prophetic texts, Daniel, Matthew, Thessalonians, Revelation.
Okay.
And our goal really is to try and cut through some of the noise. We want to bypass maybe the surface readings you might find elsewhere and really delineate the precise sequence of events.
Leading up to and during what the sources are calling the Great Tribulation.
Exactly.
So the sources promise clarity, but it sounds like the material itself needs careful handling if you, the listener, are trying to figure out the sequence.
Right.
When do these destructive figures appear? What's the clock on the beast's reign? Is there a path out for the elect? And then these final judgment.
Then this deep dive should be, well, hopefully, your intensive briefing on that.
We're really focusing on two core ideas today, aren't we?
We are. First, just defining what the Great Tribulation is, according to these texts. And second, identifying the unmistakable signal that supposedly kicks the whole chain of events off.
Okay, let's start with the stakes then. Because we're not talking about, just general hard times or societal difficulties.
Not at all. We're pulling this definition straight from the source material, specifically Matthew 24.21. And it defines this period of distress as, well, absolutely unparalleled.
Unparalleled. How so?
The text is pretty stark, actually. It basically sets up the Great Tribulation as this cataclysm, something that has no comparison historically or even in the future.
So it says what exactly?
It says, there has been no such tribulation since the beginning of the world, nor ever shall be.
Wow. Okay, that sets an absolute bar then. This is the single greatest period of human suffering imaginable, according to this view.
That's what the sources argue, and they underscore that the sheer intensity of this suffering is precisely why understanding the next part, the timing, and maybe more importantly, the path of deliverance, becomes so critical for anyone following this.
Right, because human survival itself, in this narrative, seems to hinge on this period being, well, cut short somehow.
Exactly. The shortening of the time is key. #2, the abomination, the antagonist, and the timeline debate. So to really get a handle on the Great Tribulation, you first have to understand the catalyst, what sets that prophetic clock ticking.
And that's this figure, or maybe event, known as the abomination of desolation.
Precisely. The sources point to Matthew 24.15. It pinpoints the trigger moment.
Which is?
The appearance of the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place.
Standing in the holy place. That's meant to be the clear, unambiguous signal. Like, this is it. The unparalleled distress has begun.
That's the idea. And the immediate action required really hammers home the urgency. It's not framed as a suggestion.
No, it's an imperative, right? Those in Judea are commanded to flee to the mountains immediately.
With maximum haste. And there's that crucial detail added, citing Matthew 24:1, 20.
The specifics about the timing of the flight.
Yeah, the instruction is to pray that this desperate escape doesn't happen during winter.
Which would make travel incredibly difficult, obviously. Weather, terrain.
Right. Or, and this is surprising, on the Sabbath.
Implying a level of immediate chaos that just overrides even, sacred religious rules.
The need to just drop everything and run suggests that the second this abomination appears, the situation becomes instantly lethally dangerous.
But who or what is this abomination? Do the sources give a clear identity?
Well, they provide a synthesis. It connects three highly symbolic figures, you could say, into one operational destructive force.
Okay, 3 figures into one force. That sounds complex. What are the 3?
So you have the abomination of desolation itself, which seems to be the event or the spirit. Then you have the man of lawlessness, also called the son of destruction.
That sounds more like an individual.
It does. And third, you have the Babylon harlot.
Which sounds more like a system, maybe a global one.
Exactly. A global religious political system.
It's a huge connection to make.
Yeah.
You've got a physical event, the abomination in the temple, an individual, the man of lawlessness, and this global system, the harlot. How do the sources bridge these concepts? What's the textual link?
The argument presented in the source material is that they're all expressions of the same fundamental destructive spirit and purpose.
Okay.
So the abomination of desolation is seen as let's say, the spirit of corruption made manifest.
Right.
This spirit then sort of possesses or empowers the man of lawlessness, the son of destruction, who is the one who actually carries out the physical blasphemy.
As sitting in the temple.
By sitting in the temple. And this whole operation, this entire movement, is conceptualized, directed, maybe even financed by the Babylon harlot.
The global system behind it all.
That's the synthesis presented.
So let me see if I've got this straight. The harlot provides the ideology, the doctrine. Yeah. The man of lawlessness is the individual actor carrying it out.
The main actor, yes.
And the abomination is the specific act of him being in the temple.
That's a good way to put it. The act itself, the ultimate desecration. If we focus for a moment on that individual, the man of lawlessness, or son of destruction, 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 3 and 4, really explains his function.
What does it say?
It says he's the adversary. He opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God.
Right. That act, the ultimate blasphemy in the most sacred space imaginable within that tradition. That's the precise moment the sources identify as the trigger, the start of the countdown.
That's exactly it. The sources state very clearly, the start of the 42-month rule of the beast and the start of the last week itself begins the moment the son of destruction establishes his physical, blasphemous presence in the holy, physical temple.
The clock starts ticking the instant he tries to usurp divine authority.
The countdown begins.
Okay, this brings us right to Daniel's 70th week, that final 7-year prophetic period. But the sources seem really zeroed in on the duration of suffering within that week.
Entirely. Specifically those 42 months, or 12,260 days. Or sometimes it's phrased as a time, times, and half a time, 3.5 years.
But the huge debate, the controversy, is when those 42 months actually fall within the larger 7-year week.
Yes, this is the absolute core timing controversy. And it all hinges on how you interpret a phrase in Daniel 9.27. It talks about the covenant being broken and the abomination appearing at the half or in the middle of the week.
And this isn't just some, academic squabble. For the listener trying to understand this sequence,
it determines everything.
It determines whether the Great Tribulation happens to them before some kind of deliverance, or if deliverance happens first, or maybe at the end.
Exactly. It changes the entire expected experience.
Okay. Let's spend some serious time on these 3 views then, because they clearly represent massive differences in what someone might expect. Let's start with view 1. This interprets the half as meaning the duration of the first half.
Right. View 1 argues that those 42 months of the beast's reign, the intense persecution, make up the entire first 3.5 years of the 7-year week.
So under that interpretation, the beast's authority starts immediately, like day 1 of the last week.
Pretty much. The abomination appears, maybe a covenant is made and immediately broken, and boom, the Great Tribulation is front-loaded onto that first half.
Okay, what are the implications of a front-loaded tribulation like that? What does that sequence look like?
Well, it implies the full, unmitigated suffering starts right away, day 1. This view often assumes there might be some kind of political deal or covenant made just before the week starts, maybe confirming it.
And the beast immediately rises to power, sets up his mark, his system.
Everything. The whole apparatus of control and persecution is in place from the get-go. And if that's the case, then the deliverance, the rescue of the elect you mentioned.
It would have to happen when?
It would necessarily occur right at the midpoint of the 7 years, marking the end of those 42 months of Great Tribulation.
So that offers a very structured timeline. Rapid onset of intense suffering for 3.5 years, followed by an immediate escape right at the middle.
It's a very dark beginning, followed by a rescue.
Okay. Now, view 2 seems to flip that timeline completely.
View 2 is, well, perhaps the more commonly known interpretation historically. It argues that the half means the exact midpoint of the week, the 3.5-year mark.
Right.
Therefore, the beast rule, those 42 months of unparalleled authority and tribulation, constitutes the second half of the 7 years.
So the abomination appears precisely at the halfway point, 3.5 years in.
Exactly. Breaking some kind of covenant or agreement that might have been in place during the first 3.5 years.
What does that sequence mean for events then? How does it feel different?
This view is highly specific. It implies the first half of the week, the first 3.5 years, are a time of maybe relative peace, or at least a time when the beast hasn't achieved that global blasphemous authority yet.
Okay.
So the real shock, the intensity of the Great Tribulation, begins very sharply, right at that midpoint.
And where does the rescue fit in this view?
Well, this interpretation often aligns with the idea that the rescue, the catching up, happens either before the whole 7-year week even starts.
A pre-tribulation view.
Right. Or maybe only at the very, very end of the full 7 years, after the second half tribulation and potentially after the plagues as well. It depends on how you time the plagues within that second half. But the critical point is, the unparalleled suffering, the Great Tribulation proper, is confined to those final 42 months.
Okay, that gives a much clearer dividing line. Maybe some kind of peace or deal, then bam, tribulation and war.
A clearer demarcation, yes.
But we know prophetic timelines are often, well, messy. They aren't always that neat. Which brings us to view 3, the sort of middle ground.
View 3 tries to navigate that messiness. It interprets the timing not as a strict first half, second half division, but as meaning the beast rule starts sometime during the last week.
Sometime during. Okay.
This view acknowledges the complexity here, the difficulty in trying to impose a super rigid structure onto the text. It suggests that while the duration, the 42 months, is fixed, the precise moment the abomination appears relative to that exact 3.5-year midpoint might be more fluid.
So the week is 7 years long. The beast rules for 3.5 of them. But those 42 months could maybe start, say, 2 years in or 3 years in, or even 1 year in, as long as they finish before the final judgment happens.
That's basically it. The certainty is the duration of that intense suffering, 42 months of total persecution, not necessarily the exact calendar start date relative to the absolute midpoint of the week.
So this allows the timeline to be driven more by the antagonist's actions rather than just a strict clock.
Exactly. The focus shifts slightly.
Okay, so regardless of which view the sources might lean towards, or which view someone finds more convincing, the bottom line seems inescapable.
Which is?
42 months. 3.5 years of unparalleled authority for this beast figure and guaranteed persecution for the elect. That seems locked in, right? Revelation 13 confirms that duration of authority to make war.
Absolutely locked in. The duration is consistent. The debate is purely about when within the 7 years that suffering starts, early, late, or somewhere in the middle.
And the urgency to flee the second that abomination appears. That's universal across all 3 views. That signal means get out.
Universal. That signal is the fire alarm.
All right, we've established the intense, time-bound nature of this tribulation. Now let's pivot a bit. Let's move from the timing complexities to the key players who are actually driving this persecution.
Yes.
We're talking about this, frankly, terrifying partnership described in the sources. It's between political power and, well, the ultimate source of spiritual corruption.
The red beast and Babylon and harlot.
That's the pairing. And this partnership is laid out in Revelation 17.
Right.
With some really stunning, detailed symbolism.
Oh, absolutely stunning. The scene described in verses 3 to 6 is incredibly striking. John sees this woman.
She's scarlet or red-colored?
Yes, a scarlet woman, and she's riding on a scarlet or red beast.
Oh, right.
And the beast itself is just this spectacle of terrifying power. It has 7 heads, 10 horns, and it's covered, head to tail, with names of blasphemy.
Just dripping with antagonism towards anything divine.
Completely. And the description of the woman herself leaves absolutely no doubt about her status, her luxury, but also her deep corruption.
How is she described?
She's draped in purple and scarlet.
Colors usually associated with royalty, with immense power and wealth.
Exactly. And adorned lavishly gold, precious jewels, pearls. She looks the part of absolute worldly success. But the real symbol of her operation, the thing that defines her,
Is the golden cup in her hand?
to the golden cup. Because what's inside it tells the story.
And it's not good.
It's filled with the filth of her immoralities, what the source describes as abominable things, her spiritual poison, essentially.
And she has a name, right, written on her forehead.
Yes, her full title. It's a name that really reveals her global scope and her function.
What is it?
Mystery, Great Babylon, Mother of Harlots and Abominations of the Earth.
Mother of harlots and abominations. So she's seen as the origin point, the source for all global spiritual deceit and corruption.
That's the claim in the source material, yes. She is the wellspring.
And the final, chilling confirmation of her role as the persecutor? It's what she's been drinking from that cup, isn't it?
It is. The source confirms, it states directly, she is drunk with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus.
Drunk with blood, that's visceral. A spiritual entity literally fueled, intoxicated by the persecution and the slaughter of God's people.
It's incredibly strong imagery. And to help the listener really grasp this complex, high-level apocalyptic symbolism, our source material offers up a brilliant historical analogy. It illuminates the exact relationship, the dynamic, between the beast and the harlot.
How? Using what analogy?
Using the story of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel from the Old Testament.
Ah, okay. Ahab and Jezebel. That analogy is critical then, because it helps move the discussion from pure symbolism, which can be hard to pin down,
Right.
to practical political and religious mechanics.
Right.
How does that parallel work?
So King Ahab represents the political power, the raw state authority. The sources explicitly equate him to the red beast.
Okay, Ahab is the beast, the strong arm of the state, governing by military might, legal force, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And Queen Jezebel, his wife, represents the religious power. She's equated directly to the Babylon harlot.
Jezebel is the harlot, so she provides the doctrine, the ideology, the religious justification, the zealotry needed to legitimize Ahab's often wicked rule.
Precisely.
Yeah.
She's the spiritual engine behind the political throne.
And the key symbolic act, the source says, is their marriage, their union.
Yes. The marriage of Ahab and Jezebel represents this dangerous unity. It's the point where politics and religion merge, where the civil authority and the religious authority start operating as a single, unified power structure.
And historically, when that happens,
That combination is almost always synonymous with intense persecution, with mandated spiritual corruption. Think about historical examples. It rarely ends well for dissenters.
right. And this specific unified force, this modern Ahab-Jezebel combination, the source material doesn't leave it abstract, does it? It gives it a specific identity.
It does. It's explicitly identified in the research we're drawing from as the Super Babylon Rome papacy.
Super Babylon Rome papacy. Okay, that's a very specific claim. What's the rationale the sources use to bridge that ancient Babylonian harlot imagery with, well, the structure of the papacy, particularly centered in Rome?
The argument laid out in the sources is that this entity, the harlot, must meet several key criteria from the Revelation description. Global reach, first of all, immense wealth and symbols of royalty, the purple and scarlet, the gold and jewels, being associated with a city on 7 hills, which is a classic descriptor for Rome.
Yeah.
And maybe most crucially, having a historical record, according to the sources, of persecuting the saints, of being, in that symbolic language, drunk with the blood of the martyrs.
I see.
So the synthesis presented concludes that the historical institution centered in Rome fits all these symbolic criteria. It's seen as representing the ultimate blend of religious doctrine exerting influence over or merging with political command structures throughout history, the central system dictating policy through religious fervor.
So the source material is essentially arguing that the harlot, this religious system identified with Rome, uses the beast, the political arm, the state power to execute its theological will, to enforce its doctrines.
That's precisely the operational relationship described. The material confirms the harlot, Jezebel, uses the political power, the beast Ahab, to carry out the murder and persecution of the saints.
So this partnership is the very engine of the Great Tribulation.
It's presented as the engine, yes. And Revelation 13, verses 5-7, states that because of this symbiotic relationship, because the harlot empowers the beast is granted that specific 42-month period of authority.
Authority to do what?
To wage war against the saints and, crucially, to conquer them globally during that time.
Okay, so the image of the harlot riding the beast is therefore deeply symbolic. It suggests the religious power is initially steering the political machine.
That's the interpretation. The doctrine is the head, setting the direction, and the state is the powerful body carrying it out.
Leading to worldwide, state-sanctioned persecution for that fixed period of 3.5 years.
The beast is given the authority to act, but the harlot provides the motivation, the justification. It's framed as a partnership in global spiritual corruption and ultimately physical violence against dissenters. #tag 5A, divine intervention and the path to deliverance.
Wow. Okay, that partnership paints an incredibly dark picture. 42 months of global, religiously motivated political violence where the saints are explicitly said to be conquered.
It's bleak.
Which is exactly why the next element in the source's divine intervention becomes so absolutely crucial. The narrative immediately pivots from this peak persecution to the hope for the elect.
Yes, and the idea of deliverance is tied directly back to that concept we mentioned earlier, the shortening of the days.
Right. Matthew 24 again.
The source emphasizes that the suffering during those 42 months is so intense, so overwhelming, that if the duration wasn't strictly limited,
no one would survive.
no flesh would be saved, is the phrase used. No human being would make it through. The days must be strategically limited, cut short, specifically for the sake of the elect.
It's framed as a targeted act of mercy then, not just a general end to suffering, but a strategic limitation placed on that time of maximum human pain, specifically to ensure the survival of those faithful to God.
Exactly. It's for their sake the days are curtailed.
And the mechanism for this sudden synchronized deliverance, it's linked to one specific climactic sound, isn't it?
Yes, the last trumpet.
Okay, the last trumpet. Let's look at the sequence described for that. It's in 1 Corinthians chapter 15.
Right, verses 51 to 53.
It says, the resurrection of the dead elect and the transformation of the living elect happen how?
In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet.
Instantaneous. A physical metamorphosis, preparing them for safety somehow.
That's the idea. And our source material is completely unambiguous in its synthesis here. It explicitly identifies this critical last trumpet with the seventh trumpet mentioned in Revelation.
The seventh trumpet. So that sound becomes the ultimate pivot point in the whole timeline.
Absolutely. It signals two things simultaneously. The rescue of the faithful, and it triggers the final phase of judgment upon the earth system that was persecuting them.
Okay, so when that seventh trumpet sounds, what physically happens to those being rescued? 1 Thessalonians 4 gives that sequence, right?
It does. Verses 16 and 17, Christ ascends, but only into the air, the atmosphere.
Not to the earth yet.
Not yet. The dead in Christ rise first, then the living who have endured the tribulation are caught up together with them.
Caught up where?
To meet the Lord in the air. In arpege is the Greek, sometimes translated rapture.
Okay, so this catching up is the definitive path to deliverance provided in these sources, and it's timed perfectly.
Perfectly synchronized, according to the synthesis, to happen just before the final outpouring of God's wrath begins.
Which is tied to that same trumpet sound.
Yes. The seventh trumpet initiates what Revelation calls the third woe. And the sources confirm the third woe is the 7 plagues, the final judgments.
So the rescue literally happens moments before the final catastrophic judgments start falling. This ensures the saints, the elect, are not appointed to endure that final wrath.
That is the core safety assurance presented. They are drawn up into the air, shielded, protected from the 7 plagues. Their 42 months of suffering under the beast are cut short. They are taken out of the direct line of divine fury and sheltered while the global destruction unfolds below.
The source material even gives some metaphorical names for this place of refuge, doesn't it? Using language that suggests total security.
It does. The air, or the place they are caught up to, is identified symbolically in the sources with terms like the Sea of Glass from Revelation, or Mount Zion.
Okay.
And it's also described as a kind of secret closet or chamber. This references Isaiah 26, verses 20 and 21, where God tells his people to enter their rooms and shut the doors behind them for a little while.
Until what?
Until the divine fury or indignation has passed by.
That image is incredibly powerful. Like a protected quarantine zone, a heavenly shelter established just in time, while the earth below faces the final judgment.
Exactly. And this whole sequence, suffering followed by miraculous removal to safety just before judgment falls, is deliberately paralleled in the sources with a key Old Testament event.
Which one?
The Exodus. Specifically, the Israelites passing safely through the Red Sea.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay. How does that parallel work?
Just as that passage through the sea served as a path of safety for them, while judgment in the form of the collapsing waters fell upon the pursuing Egyptian army. So too, the elect are removed to safety in the air before the catastrophic judgments, the 7 plagues, fall upon the unrepentant world system, the beast's kingdom that was persecuting them.
This really clarifies the timing relative to those woes mentioned in Revelation. The 7th trumpet essentially concludes the Great Tribulation for the elect. It ends their suffering.
Yes.
But it begins the 3rd woe, which is solely focused on the 7 plagues being poured out on those who took the mark and worshiped the beast.
Precisely. The first 2 woes, which are linked to earlier trumpet judgments, were severe, but they were perhaps warnings or partial judgments. The 3rd woe, the 7 plagues unleashed by the 7th trumpet, is presented as the absolute culmination of wrath.
It marks the end of the beast's 42 months of allowed domination.
Replaced immediately by the crushing final judgment of God.
Okay, we're transitioning now to that final and most catastrophic phase of the prophetic timeline described in our sources. The 7 plagues, also called the 7 golden bowl judgments.
Yeah.
And the source material is really explicit. This brief but incredibly intense period of judgment happens immediately after the elect are removed. It concentrates God's wrath squarely upon the global system of the beast and the harlot.
This is presented as the undiluted, concentrated wrath of God. Revelation depicts the temple in heaven filling with smoke from God's glory.
Signifying what?
Signifying that judgment is now absolute, unchangeable, unchallengeable. No more intercession is possible. The 7 angels then receive these 7 golden bowls filled with this wrath, ready to pour them out on a global scale.
All right, let's detail these judgments. We're pulling from Revelation chapter 16 here. Start with the first bowl. What's the initial, very targeted judgment?
The first bowl is poured out onto the earth. The result is immediate. Foul and painful sores.
Sores, like boils.
Grievous, malignant sores, yes. And crucially, they only afflict those who specifically received the mark of the beast and worshipped his image.
So it's a direct physical consequence tied specifically to their allegiance to that corrupt system.
Exactly. Their very flesh begins to, well, decompose, essentially, while they're still living. It's a horrific start.
Okay. Moving to the environmental judgments then. The next 2 bowls seem to devastate the water sources.
They do. The second bowl targets the sea. The entire body of global marine water turns
The blood.
to blood. Like the blood of a dead man is the description, instantly chilling all life within it. The entire marine ecosystem completely obliterated.
Utter devastation in the oceans. And the third bowl, it completes that water judgment.
It focuses on humanity's essential supply, fresh water. The rivers and the springs also turn to blood.
All freshwater sources gone too.
Yes, and there's this moment where an angel is quoted in the sources pronouncing the justice of this specific judgment.
What does the angel say?
Declares that since the wicked systems, the beast and harlot, shed the blood of saints and prophets during the tribulation,
Right.
it is fitting, it is righteous judgment, that they now have only blood to drink. The punishment mirrors the crime, essentially.
Wow. Okay. The fourth bowl is terrifying in a different way. It manipulates the most fundamental life-giving force on Earth, the sun.
Yes, the fourth bowl is poured out directly onto the sun, and the sun is then given power, authority, to scorch men with fire.
So intense heat, unbearable heat.
Unbearable, scorching heat, resulting in severe, agonizing burns for people on Earth. But what's fascinating, and frankly tragic in the description,
Is the human response.
exactly. Even under this agonizing, inescapable heat, the source confirms they refuse to repent. Instead, they double down. They blaspheme the name of God who has control over these plagues.
No repentance, just anger and blasphemy.
That's the picture painted.
Okay, the fifth bowl. This seems like a very targeted attack, aimed right at the heart of the beast's power structure.
It is. It's poured out directly onto the throne of the beast.
And the result?
The result is the plunging of his entire kingdom, his entire sphere of influence, into thick darkness.
Darkness, while they're still suffering from the sores and the heat?
Yes. Darkness descends, simultaneous with the ongoing torment from the sores from the first bowl and the burning heat from the fourth. The sources say people are in such agony that they literally bite their own tongues in distress.
Yet still no repentance?
Still blaspheming God because of their pains and their sores. It signifies the total collapse of the beast's infrastructure, his control, his morale. Even if his physical reign hasn't technically ended at this precise moment, his kingdom is broken.
Okay. This leads us now to the sixth bowl. And this one seems different. It's a major geopolitical event described. The drying up of the great river Euphrates.
Yes, this is a really remarkable detail, loaded with deep historical resonance. The text says the river dries up. Why? Specifically to prepare a route.
A route for whom?
For the kings from the east.
The kings from the east. Okay, we really have to pause and consider the geography here for a second. The Euphrates River today flows through modern nations like Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. And historically, that river was a massive natural barrier. It provided immense protection, particularly for the city of ancient Babylon, located in modern Iraq.
It was their moat, essentially, and the sources draw a very powerful historical comparison here.
They link this apocalyptic drying to what?
To the historical instance where Cyrus the Great, the Persian king, conquered Babylon. How did he do it? By cleverly diverting the waters of the Euphrates River upstream, allowing his army to march into the city on the dry riverbed under the walls.
Wow. So the prophecy suggests that the removal of the river's protection is symbolically the removal of the world system's security barrier. Its defenses are down.
That's the interpretation. The natural protection is supernaturally removed.
Okay, but who are these kings from the east whose path is being paved? This interpretation seems vital.
It is, if the drying of the river facilitates the destruction of Babylon, the global governmental system, the sources suggest these eastern kings are not an earthly army in the typical sense.
No. Who then?
They are potentially the army following Jesus Christ upon his return. Specifically, the sources mention the kingly priests, the resurrected and transformed saints, the heavenly army returning with Christ.
Why from the east, specifically?
The sources note that a previous key messenger in Revelation, the angel bearing the seal of the living God in chapter 7, also came from the rising of the sun, from the east. So the east becomes this symbolic direction of divine intervention, of God's arrival.
Okay, so the drying of the river isn't just some random environmental catastrophe in this narrative. It's the supernatural paving of an invasion route for the forces of righteousness, led by Christ and his saints.
That's the interpretation presented, absolutely. But just as this divine preparation happens, there's a final counter move from the other side.
What happens?
As the river dries, the forces of evil make their last stand. 3 foul, frog-like, unclean spirits.
Frog-like spirits.
Yes, described as coming from the mouths of the dragon, Satan, the beast, the political leader, and the false prophet, the religious leader of the beast's system.
What did these spirits do?
They are demonic, miracle-working spirits sent out to gather all the kings, all the armies of the entire inhabited world.
To gather them where? For what purpose?
To gather them together for one final, desperate, unified battle. The war on the great day of God Almighty.
This is the gathering for the final conflict, then. This sets the stage for Armageddon.
Exactly. Armageddon is the destination point for all those armies gathered by the sixth bull's demonic preparations. The term itself, Armageddon, is usually interpreted as meaning mountain of Megiddo.
And Megiddo, that region in Israel, it translates to gathering place, right? Or maybe place of slaughter.
Both are suggested. It's the designated location where the assembled armies of the world, brought there by those evil spirits, will meet their ultimate doom.
And the sources make sure to load this location with powerful historical echoes, don't they? To define the nature of this final battle.
Yes, absolutely. The site or the region is linked symbolically to Mount Carmel.
Where the prophet Elijah had his showdown.
Exactly. Where Elijah historically defeated the 450 prophets of Baal. It represents a decisive victory over corrupt, state-sponsored religion.
Okay.
And it's also connected geographically and thematically to the area where Jehu, the Israelite commander, destroyed the forces loyal to the corrupt queen Jezebel.
Jezebel again, our harlot figure.
Right, representing a victory over that toxic blend of corrupt political and religious harlotry. So the symbolic context is crystal clear.
This isn't just a military battle. It's the place where God definitively defeats institutionalized corruption, false worship, and the persecution driven by that harlot beast alliance.
That's the framework. It is here, at Armageddon, that the gathered armies of the world will face Jesus Christ, described in Revelation as the rider on the white horse who will descend with his heavenly armies.
And the outcome.
The destruction of the beast and the false prophet, signaling the absolute end of the global political religious resistance against God. This leads directly, seamlessly, into the seventh bowl judgment, which represents the absolute climax, the utter finality of God's wrath in this sequence.
Okay, the seventh bowl. Where's it poured out?
Into the air. The realm above the earth, perhaps signifying total atmospheric or even cosmic judgment. And as it's poured, a loud voice echoes from the throne in the heavenly temple, declaring with absolute authority, "It is done."
It is done. The judgment is complete. The wrath is finished.
And the resulting catastrophe on earth is described as a super great earthquake.
Super great.
An earthquake so massive, so globally devastating, that it's unparalleled in all of human history. Nothing even remotely close has ever occurred.
What does it do?
Cities around the world collapse into rubble. Islands sink beneath the waves. Mountains are leveled. They literally vanish from the landscape. The sheer physical devastation is meant to be completely unimaginable. Total reshaping of the planet.
And crucially, the source material says the seventh bowl specifically includes the final judgment on that entity we discussed earlier.
Yes. The great city, Babylon the harlot. She receives the full cup, the undiluted dregs of God's fierce wrath in this final plague. The sources indicate that the earth is left almost completely desolate by the cumulative effect of these 7 plagues. It's a near total destruction of the existing world system and environment. But the mechanism of the harlot's destruction, how she finally falls, it's perhaps the most shocking and, in a way, satisfying moment of divine justice described in the narrative.
How so?
Because it ties back perfectly to that Ahab and Jezebel parallel we discussed. The sources emphasize, based on Revelation 17, the red beast turns on the harlot.
The political power turns on the religious power. But why? Weren't they partners in crime?
They were. But Revelation 17, verses 16 and 17 provides the reason. The red beast and its 10 horns representing the collective political power structure of the world at that time, they eventually realized something.
What did they realize?
They realized they were deceived by the harlot. They finally recognized the depth of the corruption, the lies, the manipulation that defined their alliance all along. They wake up to how badly they were used. And this realization isn't just random, it's guided, the text says, by a divine impulse. God himself puts it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, his judgment.
So God uses the beast to judge the harlot.
Exactly. They will turn on the harlot they once served. They will hate her. They will make her desolate and naked, stripping her of all her wealth and power. They will symbolically eat her flesh, consuming her resources, and then utterly burn her with fire. The system turns violently upon its former master.
This brings that Jezebel parallel full circle, doesn't it?
Perfectly. Because Jezebel's fate, after Jehu had her thrown from the window, was that her body was eaten by dogs in the street. It was an ignominious, shameful end, confirming God's judgment on her corrupt religious tyranny.
And the sources explicitly make that connection.
They confirm this apocalyptic echo directly, stating plainly based on Revelation 17, the red beast will tear apart the Babylon harlot. The once unified system, identified by the source as the Super Babylon Rome papacy, is violently ripped apart, consumed, destroyed by the very political power it once commanded and directed.
The irony is incredibly powerful. The very alliance that drove the Great Tribulation, that persecuted the saints, it ends not primarily by an external enemy striking it down, but by a vicious internal self-destruction.
Engineered by divine providence, using the beast's own awakened fury to destroy the corrupt religious system that was its source of motivation. The beast, in the end, fulfills God's ultimate will by consuming the harlot.
This confirms, then, that while the political machine, the I-Beast figure, was certainly judged as evil,
yes,
the corrupt religious system, the Jezebel harlot figure, was identified as the primary object of God's ultimate fiery wrath, punished, ironically, by the very instrument, the very political power it had previously weaponized to commit violence against the saints.
That's the final stunning reversal of power described in the sources.
Wow. Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We've really executed a monumental task here, charting this prophetic clock all the way from that initial trigger event.
The abomination standing in the temple.
Right. Through the specific 42 months of the beast's total authority, the subsequent immediate deliverance of the elect via that seventh trumpet.
Which is also the last trumpet.
Exactly. Then the pouring out of 7 plagues, the bold judgments, the geopolitical shift signaled by the drying of the Euphrates, preparing the way.
For the kings from the east.
And finally, culminating in that stunning, almost cannibalistic, self-inflicted downfall of the Babylon harlot at the hands of the beast she once rode.
The synthesis that emerges from the sources is incredibly tight when you lay it all out. That seventh trumpet truly is the absolute pivot point.
Yeah.
It marks the instantaneous, glorious rescue of the elect from the tribulation, and simultaneously the immediate start of the third woe.
Which is the 7 plagues.
Which is the 7 plagues. Effectively, the highly compressed, catastrophic judgment phase corresponding perhaps to the latter half or the very end of that last week. The key is that the time of suffering for the elect is cut short. They are explicitly not subjected to the final divine wrath poured out in those bowls.
So this timeline offers a very clear structure if you follow the source's synthesis. Persecution first, the 42 months, followed by rescue at the 7th trumpet, followed immediately by divine wrath poured out on the persecuting system, the 7 plagues.
That's the sequence presented, and that entire narrative, as we saw, hinges powerfully on understanding how political and religious power can become dangerously intertwined.
Illuminated so vividly by that Ahab and Jezebel analogy.
Exactly. The source material uses their toxic relationship, their marriage of convenience and power, to explain how the final destruction of the harlot by the beast she controlled is the ultimate act of God's judgment on a corrupt, hypocritical, persecuting system.
Okay, so building on that, and especially on the source's explicit identification in their analysis, which they name as the Super Babylon Rome papacy here, is a final provocative thought for you, our listener, to consider as you digest this deep dive. If the prophetic fate of the harlot, this powerful religious system, is to be violently turned upon and destroyed by the very political power she once seemed to control. What foundational systems in our modern world today,
Okay.
whether in government, global finance, social movements, ideologies, rely on a similarly dangerous, intertwined structure of political and religious, or perhaps quasi-religious ideological power?
That's a deep question.
And if such systems exist, how vulnerable might those seemingly solid, impregnable systems actually be to internal resentment, internal malice, and maybe eventual violent self-destruction, potentially engineered by forces or consequences they don't even perceive right now?
Understanding the prophetic breakdown of these kinds of power dynamics, as described in these ancient texts, often does illuminate potential vulnerabilities or dangerous trajectories in current systems, especially systems that rely on combining sacred or unquestionable authority with secular coercive force. It's definitely a crucial question to explore further.
Something to think about. Thank you for diving deep with us today.